Good evening, and a very warm welcome to this Friends of St Nicholas fundraising event. The church benefits greatly from the concerts and other events the committee organises. So on behalf of the church, many thanks to the committee for what I know will be a wonderful evening. There will be an opportunity to give a donation to the Friends funds either by cash or through the card machine. And I feel sure that after hearing about Claude's life, you will wish to purchase his book, which can be found at the back on the table near the hymn book stands. The bar will be open again in the interval for wine and soft drinks. And all remains for me to say thank you very much to Jill for being the interviewer, and welcome to Claude to tell us about his life and share some of his favourite music.
Well, good evening from us, and again, welcome to you all, and also to the people watching at home, and thank you very much for coming. Desert Island Discs Blakeney style has two differences from the radio broadcast. For a start, you get more music, because it's going on longer, and secondly, you get a chance to charge up your glasses in the interval. So thank you to St Nicholas, Friends of St Nicholas Church for organising this. Now we all know Claude is the kind, generous, wise friend, member of the clergy team, and he challenges and delights us with his sermons. But there's a lot behind Claude, I can tell you. So let's start. Claude, you were born in Toulon in France. How come?
I was, yes. Can I just check first of all that my voice is getting to the front, to the back? Yes, thank you. Yes, I was born in France. My parents were there because something happened in an open air service in London. My father went to it, heard someone preach the gospel, was converted, and decided there and then that he himself wanted to be a preacher of the gospel. You have absolutely no idea why that music was being played. We'll come to that in a moment. So just to explain, so my father wanted to become a missionary, and a missionary in Africa where they spoke French. So he went to France, ostensibly to learn the language, found some Christians there who were keen to have some fresh input into their work. So they invited him to start helping them with their services and preaching. And eventually he found a niche. His French wasn't too good at that time, but he still managed to preach and lay hands on the sick. That's where he felt his ministry was. And went from, went from town to town in France, preaching the gospel and opening churches. We'll come back to that a little bit later, I think. But so he was quite a shrewd man. So during the winter months, he was down in the south of France. Hence, I was born in November in Toulon. My older brother was born in Dijon, which is towards the south of France. Then in the summer months, he came and worked in the north of France. So that's how I came to be born in France.
Right. And once you'd been born in France, fairly soon you went off to Africa, taken by your parents, so
that's
to the Congo.
That's right, yes. At a meeting in Marseille, it's a church which I've actually visited myself. My father definitely felt the call. This was the time to go to Congo. So we set off. I was only 2, so I can't remember any of this journey, but my parents tell me we went down through the Suez Canal, down the east coast of Africa, and down to Dar es Salaam, then went across from East to Central Africa by train, and there were plenty of trains in Africa at that time, which were put there by the colonials, and into the Congo, right near Lake Tanganyika. So that's where we lived.
And your upbringing was very different from the average English child's upbringing, I think. First of all, language, Claude.
Right, well, my parents, looking back, astonished me by not speaking English to us when we were in the Congo. My father's idea was if he was going to a new place, he was going to learn the language and then practice it as much as he could. So as far as I can remember, we spoke very little English. We learned a lot of Swahili because we spent a lot of time with children who came to our mission station. And also from our cook, Yusuf, whom we came to love, we spoke with him totally in Swahili. So no English books, not even for me an English Bible, but I had a Swahili New Testament.
And what about toys?
No, well, we did have some toys, but they weren't conventional ones. I think I was 2 when we went out and 9 when I left. So the only toys we had were empty tin cans from food which we'd eaten, and a rusty old car, and trees, because you could climb trees. More interestingly, we lived actually right close to the lakeside, where in the mornings we could see crocodiles bathing in the sunshine. And so my brother in particular quite liked throwing stones at crocodiles. It amused him. It frightened me. But that's basically, we spent our time outdoors with children trying to create buildings from old tin cans. And it's amazing how much you can do with just a few things.
You had 2 brothers, but I think only one of them was with you in the Congo.
That's correct. Lionel, who was my older brother, was in Marseille when we were there. But at that point, my parents sent him back to England to be educated in England. So he came to live with an aunt. I went to a school in Brentwood, and we then went to Congo. So I didn't see that brother until he was 14.
And Bernard?
And my younger brother was born in the Congo. And in the way my parents worked, this was a bit of shrouded in mystery, but my mother went away for a while and then came back later with this baby. But he obviously we were brought up together, so we spent actually many happy years for us in the Congo.
And one of the things that you mentioned in your book, actually, which we'll talk about later, was the arrival of boxes. Can you tell us a bit about the arrival of boxes?
Yes, not many exciting things happened in one sense, although life was pretty exciting a lot of the time. Every so often, a tea chest, a box, would arrive from the UK. The Missionary Society sent us good things for us to have, and it was wartime, remember, so certain things, and I like milk, powdered egg, and things like that. Included in these boxes were shoes, which were always too big for us, trousers and flimsy shirts, which are never fitted, and I can't ever remember wearing anything that actually fitted when we were there. One of the interesting things I always remember about that box is that it had quinine powder. Excuse me. So quinine powder came in cartons, and also there was another carton with little capsules. And my mother would lay out a cloth on the table, and the powder was put down on there, and our job was to fill each capsule with quinine. So we'd tap it into the quinine, fill it up, and then put the other bit of the capsule on, put it to one side. And I tell you, it takes a mighty long time to use up 1 kilogram of quinine, putting them into capsules like that. That's a memory I'll always have about those boxes.
And I think you didn't see all that much of your father all the time, did you?
No, well, he did the same thing in Congo that he did in France. He set off and went to village after village, preaching the gospel and establishing churches. In France, he was able to travel about by train and by car. In the Congo, the rusty car that we had in our compound, of course, didn't work. So he walked everywhere. And he became famous, actually, for walking all over the territory. And you could say a village might be 5 or 10 kilometers away from the next village. And he walked everywhere. Every village he visited to preach, he walked there. Occasionally, very occasionally, we went with him. And that was interesting, because if you were going to go on a journey with my father, that was a whole business. Because my mother was coming as well, of course, and all the goods and everything we needed to take. I always remember one when we went to a place called Kalembe, which was up in the hills, and where 2 women missionaries were working, Miss Node and Miss Heggie, and we knew them as Auntie Node and Auntie Meggie, and they were lovely women. And when they were going there, we asked if we could go with them. So we went with my parents on one of these trips, and you'd have, 25 men carrying all the goods, 3 or 4 hammocks. My mother was always carried in a hammock, a couple of hammocks for myself and my brother in case we needed them, and other hammocks for more heavy goods. So you had this long trail of people that would walk. So we would do maybe 15, 20 kilometers a day, stay overnight, and go another 20, 30 kilometers, stay overnight. This trip, some of you may have heard me talk about this, but this trip was interesting for one thing, which was at one point we had to cross a river, and it had been raining a lot, so there was a torrent coming down the valley, and the river must have been 60, 80 feet down below us. And to cross it, we had to go across a bridge, a footbridge, made out of the roots of the trees that grew either side of this river. And I tell you, that was frightening if you go on one of those. So the thing was, they sent somebody in advance, and they checked everything out, and the thing swayed like this, in the wind and everything. And then my father, who was totally fearless, he then would go out. My mother was frightened to death of anything like that, so she had to be carried, but she closed her eyes and prayed the whole time going over there. When it came to my turn, my dad said, well, look, you can come across. You've seen these other people. And I made a mistake of looking down. When I looked down, I couldn't cope with it. I started feeling dizzy, so I got carried across. And that's a memory I'll just have. That always comes back to me as part of Africa, that you can cross rivers on foot, but not this one.
Sounds terrifying. And just lastly on this section, school and church. You lived by the church, didn't you?
Yes, so the mission station was by the lake, and the church there were 3 buildings, the one we lived in, one for other missionaries, and the church, and these were brick built. And we didn't see many brick built buildings, but these were brick built. And they looked smart, and you had mosquito netting and everything in it. So we went to school, but it was the school within the church. And it had a very limited agenda. It was all done in Swahili, of course. So we heard Bible stories a lot at the school. We learnt Swahili through really the New Testament, reading that. And I could write Swahili, and I could write Swahili before I could write English, because I've got my Swahili New Testament here. It's got my handwriting in the front of it, but very limited. And we had no books, so there were no textbooks or anything. So it was done on a blackboard. And I had exercise books. That's one of the things the Missionary Society sent out, exercise. So I had a pencil and exercise books. African children didn't have anything. So that was our schooling. Limited, but they did do arithmetic. And I was good at arithmetic. And so I got more of it. And when my father saw I was good at it, he asked the other missionary to give me more arithmetic. so much arithmetic. When I got back to England, eventually went to school, I was far ahead of everybody else in arithmetic, but I knew nothing about anything else in this country.
Right, and lastly, the music in church, leading on to your first choice, I think.
One of the things that did surprise me, well, I suppose it shouldn't have done, but I was surprised as a young boy, because my parents taught these Africans hymns that were English hymns translated into Swahili, and they used the same tunes that we used. But once they learnt the tune, they could just harmonize it, just like that. And every time you go to Africa, it's amazing how Africans can harmonize. And it just got music in their bones. So that impressed me even as a child. It impresses me still now.
So, would you like to say something about this first disc?
Now, the first piece of music is about Africa. It's an African piece written by Africans. It's written, the title is Kiruandan. I have to remind myself what the words I mean. But it's a Kiruandan hymn. And the reason I've chosen it is because it's totally African, and it has them singing in harmony, and just takes my mind back to Africa. We'll come to Rwanda again a little bit later. But this particular group, singing and playing, are mostly orphans of the genocide. Many of you will know about the awful genocide. Now, so to listen to them singing and thanking God for what he's done for them is very moving for me, to listen to it. You won't understand any of the words. I'll tell you what some of them mean in a minute. But for me, and remember, this is 2024, the 30th anniversary of the genocide will be next month, and you'll hear something about it. So this brings all those memories back to me. So the chorus, meaning the title of the sing is Glory or Honor. The chorus more or less says this: the power, the glory, the glorious beauty of the King in me cause me to rejoice in God forever. And those were orphans of the genocide, giving this as their testimony. Yeah.
Baririmbira
hope you enjoyed that African singing. Right, finally the war ended, Claude, and you and your parents were able to come back to England. Do you want to just give us a very quick account of the journey home?
Yes, I could keep you a long time over this. My parents got a letter basically to say to them, you're now able to return. Normally speaking, missionaries spend 5 years abroad and then they come back. But this was longer, obviously. My father had had malaria, had actually been quite ill and lost a lot of weight, and so he needed to get back. And so we were thrilled to get this letter. As I explained to you, we came in through the east coast, but actually went back from the west coast of Africa, coming from where we were, along the River Congo on a paddle steamer and by train, right over to Boma, where we caught a passenger ship. And that passenger ship had obviously seen better times because it was pockmarked and everything, had been used for other things during the war. So we were able to come back on that. And just to say one thing about being on that ship, we discovered things like showers and taps and flushing toilets, which we'd never seen before. And we practiced these quite a lot, Bernard and me, and upset some of the people on the board, I think, with that. But it was so outrageously modern for us to see things like this. We basically had no luxuries of that sort in the Congo. So we came back by ship, and on this trip, my mother started knitting jumpers for us, and my father just read the Bible as he did any time he had spare time. So we came back to Antwerp, and my goodness, it was cold, really cold. And it was only September, and we felt cold. So my mother took me to a shop, both of us, and bought us overcoats that were in far too long, in all directions. Then even if we wore 3 jumpers underneath, the coat was still too big. And anyway, we came back to England by train, right across into where my family lived in Ilford in East London at the time. So we noticed that change in temperature very quickly. But remember, we hadn't got long trousers or anything. We had these flimsy shorts that I'd come across in these boxes. So that was traumatic. Then we had to settle into this country. When we were in Congo, my parents had told us, my eldest brother was in a good school, and they wanted to find a good school for us. And so my parents promised they would do that. So as soon as they came back, they said, we'll start looking for a good school for you. But we hadn't really taken in the fact that when they came back, they would go on furlough, as missionaries did in those days, to visit churches and speak about their work and collect money, funds for the missionary societies. So very soon they started on these journeys to different churches, and we had to be found primary schools. So for 18 months, my younger brother and I went to at least 10 different primary schools in all different locations in this country. I can't remember the name of some of them. Just in one of them, the one in the town where we came from, our family, in Ilford in Essex, we were there for a good 6 or 8 months. And that was, if any of you remember, 1946-47 winter, so absolutely fierce winter. My brother and I were posted in a family in Ilford while my parents went off elsewhere doing their furlough, not knowing any English, and going to a school, not knowing any English, and being housed with a family who were lovely, but very strict. And that was a very difficult winter. We loved the snow when it first came, but didn't stay fond of it for very long. And so that was a very difficult time. And going from school to school, having to adjust, sometimes only for 2 weeks, then going to the next place and going to the next place, often not staying with our parents. They would be in one person's house, we would be in some other person's house, was actually quite difficult. And my younger brother really was troubled by all of this. you know, it's bad enough coming to England not learning English. If you'd been in one school, it might have been a help. The first school actually was very good, the one we went to in Ilford. The others, more difficult. I remember one where, and this was quite early on, but just one classroom, one teacher, and my brother was in the front row, and he was asked a question about an adjective. This was a little boy of about 6 who knew hardly any English, and he didn't know what the word adjective meant, let alone to identify it. And what he got for not having an answer was a ruler over his knuckles. And that really upset me, and I actually stood up and said something in my halting English, which the teacher wasn't too pleased about.
Well done, you. So they kept searching for the right school, and eventually you finished up where?
Well, they did find the right school. They were looking for a boarding school. And looking back on it, I understand why, because what they wanted to do was to go back to France to continue their work. To do that, we needed to be boarded out. So they eventually found a boarding school in South Wales, in Swansea, a school for missionaries' children. And this was part of the Bible College of Wales. The college part of it trained people to be missionaries, and the school part was a school. And half of that, about 60, contained boarders, all of whom were missionaries' children. And I tell you, I know we've got still friendly with some who were left at the age of 5 when their parents went away, and they wouldn't see them for 5 years at least. So 5 years at a time, they might get a glimpse of their parents. The rest of the time, they didn't. We were fortunate because my parents went back to Europe. We could visit them every year, pretty much.
We're coming back to that.
Yeah. So they found this school, and it was a Christian school, a Christian boarding school, which would have pleased my parents, but it didn't live up to being a good school for various reasons. First of all, the staff. Well, the one thing I should say, well, as I mentioned, the staff were all single. They weren't allowed to marry. They even weren't allowed to communicate much with each other outside their work. So when they had meals, they sat at separate tables. And as children, when we had meals, we sat at separate tables. There was a rule number 7, boys and girls must not spend time together in or out of school. So it was very strict in that sort of way, a very narrow view of what being a Christian meant, and very tight. So we had to kneel by our bedside at 7:30 in the morning for 15 minutes to pray. We had assemblies where you'd get close to a sermon, and evening prayers. So we had a lot of that reinforcement throughout the time. So Christian school it certainly was, and you couldn't argue about that. But there were aspects of it which were difficult, particularly with children who weren't seeing their parents very much. So
I think you were allowed out on a Saturday to go to rugby.
Well, we did have some freedoms. When you got older, there were all sorts of things that went by hierarchy there. So as you got older, you got more freedoms. And when we got into the 5th and 6th forms, as they were called then, we were allowed to go out. So we were allowed to go and watch rugby. Now, in Wales, you play rugby. And we played a lot of rugby, and I enjoyed it. And so we went often to watch rugby teams, or Swansea, the All Whites play. But at times there was a good film showing on in Swansea. Now, films were evil, according to this school, so we weren't allowed to see films at all. I'm getting interrupted. We weren't allowed to see films. They were evil. So what we did, we went into Swansea by bus, saw the film, and went round to the field at rugby club, and the rugby field, waited for people to come out, asked them how the game went, who won, who scored the tries, what were the highlights. So when we got back to school, if they asked us about it, we could tell them. But we didn't actually see the match.
Right, well, I think we've got time for your next disc, please, Claude.
So my next disc is Cuma, and it's a well-known hymn, of course. I haven't lost my Welshness entirely, I have to say, even though I've lost the accent. I had the big accent when I came to London. But Cumronda here is sung by the Morriston Orpheus Male Voice Choir. There are lots of male voice choirs in Wales. There are lots of them derived from the mining communities. Morriston is only 8 or 10 miles from where the school was, so I identify with this particular choir. I identify with this music just because I love, I just love that hymn, and it expresses my faith in so many ways, but it takes me back to Wales. And when I listen to it, it makes my hair curl. So here we go. Before.
You started it just now.
Cumronda.
All my troubles seem all.
Not that one. Cumronda. It's number 4, I think.
Yeah,
We shall have to ask the audience to stand up and sing it instead. can't see a curl on your hair, Claude, but I agree with you, it's fantastic.
How about that? And by the way, it's St. David's Day today.
Yes, yes, it is.
So it's very appropriate.
Now, just a word before we get on to slightly later life, a bit about school holidays at this school in Wales. There were two sorts of holidays, those in England and those in France. So do you want to say a bit about that?
Yes, yes. If you recall, I was explaining how for many of us, our children, our parents were away, and we spent Easter and Christmas holidays quite often in the school because some of us didn't have anywhere else to go. And so holidays we had to make do, amuse ourselves, find things to do and so on during those two times. And at Christmas times in particular, it was quite challenging. And so there could be maybe 15 of us boarders or 20 in this school trying to enjoy Christmas. And they did their best for us, but it's not the same as being with a family, that's for sure. But what tended to happen, of course, is that we became our own family because our parents were away and we didn't see them very much. And so we bonded together as brothers and sisters, and many of us are still in touch with each other because of that. I remember one Easter holidays sometimes were quite long. And when I got a little bit older, I thought, well, I'm not just going to stay here, I'll do something. So I had a good bicycle. So I organised myself a cycling trip, about 1,000 miles or so, going to different youth hostels and then visiting different people I knew, some of them school friends in different towns. I did a circular trip around the north and back around the south coast and back into Wales. And I enjoyed this cycling. Of course, you make friends when you're at youth hostels and so on. On this particular trip, I visited a girlfriend down in Bournemouth and came back to school, and that was that. But when term started, I was summoned to the head's office, and he'd found out I'd done this. I remember Rule 7, and so he castigated me for the fact that I'd broken this rule and I'd visited this girl and even got other friends to connive to arrange the visit. And I wasn't supposed to meet girls in or out of school. So I was head prefect at the time and had this head prefect badge taken off me, which wasn't very pleasant. But the worst of it all was that when my parents got to hear of this, their reaction was just, can't put it into words really. My father was very, very angry, and I got the longest letter I'd ever had from them when I was at that school. So that was a very difficult time for me. What was interesting was all my friends at school, even after my demotion, we still got on pretty well. So that was good. But
now, what about holidays in France?
At holidays in France, now Bernard and I were able to visit my parents in France, wherever my parents were. And we became quite good travellers. We were only young, but we learned how to get trains down to London, tubes across to Heathrow Airport, planes over to France, Algeria. We did all this, and we visited all sorts of towns in France. So I knew France at one time a whole lot better than I knew England. And visited all sorts of towns. I always remember going to Algeria. We went to Algeria twice, actually. And got to know something of the history of that country when we were there. I was baptized actually in Bordeaux by my father. I was the 50th person to be baptized in an open-air swimming pool. And that was featured actually in the local newspaper at the time. So France has a lot of nice connections for me. But the flip side of all of this was that when we go to visit our parents, they were working, always evangelizing, always preaching, always working. They never had their own home. They lived in somebody else's flat or with a flat which they rented. Often when we went there, they were in one place and we were staying in another with somebody else. We didn't always share time with them all the time, which was unfortunate. But then, my parents would do, 12 services a week, 2 a day except Saturday. And we couldn't go to all of these. It was ridiculous to expect us. So we spent much of our time walking around the towns, finding out what Bordeaux was like, and Paris and Perpignan and Toulouse and all these places. We got to know them quite well, but we weren't with our parents. And you start putting this together. In Africa, my father was away a lot. When they came back to England, they went around the country visiting churches, and we were posted in different families. Then we were at the school, and even when we visited our parents, we didn't have very much time actually within the family. So that was a difficult thing for us, and particularly for my younger brother. I remember being asked to help my parents, because what they did, they would go into a town, and they'd have these little A5 posters, and they'd post them in all the letterboxes, inviting people to their meetings. Then they'd hire a hall. Usually it was a small hall above a cafe. Sometimes it had a piano, sometimes it didn't. But my parents had a violin. They were both very good musicians. My mother played the piano, my father played the violin. And so if there wasn't a piano, they'd lead the singing by playing the violin. And we were asked to help them. So we would spend quite a bit of our holidays pushing these pamphlets into people's letterboxes, and then occasionally coming to the service to follow them through. What's interesting about all this, my parents were never paid. When they were in France, they worked and lived by faith. So when they started services, all they had was just a box at the back, invited people to donate. When they were in Africa, they were with a missionary society there. They got paid, but all the rest of their time, they never were paid by anyone. They were donated a car by the Swiss churches. So basically, they lived out of 2 or 3 suitcases and in this car and in whatever accommodation they could get.
I think being a missionary's child was not an easy thing in those days. Claude, I think you're doing disc number 3 now, which we've already heard a little bit of, but perhaps you can hear it properly now.
We have an introduction to this. I'm sorry about that technology, but we'll just do our best to work through this. This next one is Yesterday by the Beatles. I'm not the man I used to be. Yesterday. Well, the words of this, I don't want to get the words of this because the lovely little lines we've got. All my troubles seem so far away. So when I chose this word came to my mind. It wasn't the reason I chose it. All my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as if they're here to stay. Here am I on a desert island, and I thought my troubles had gone away, but actually here they are, here to stay. But it's not really the reason. Not really the reason I chose that. I love the Beatles. They were big when I was a student. And when I was doing research in the labs, you often just had the Beatles music going on in the background. And they are an extraordinary group of people. And I appreciated their music from all sorts of angles. Yes, a lot of guitar music. Yes, a lot of rock music. But if you think about the variety and musicality of Beatles music, it is quite extraordinary. They drew a lot from classical music and didn't always have guitars in their background. And so the reason I chose this music, first of all, it would remind me of my student days and actually of my time when my family grew up, because we had 2, 3 Beatles LPs, and my grandson's got those now. And we used to play them quite a lot, so they were a big feature of our lives during that time. So, the Beatles, Yesterday. instruments that weren't guitars, string instruments. That's the thing about the Beatles. They were so wide in their repertoire and the way they used musical instruments.
Thank you. Now, Claude, you then went on to university to study what?
So I studied chemistry, mathematics and physics, but eventually two subjects, chemistry and mathematics, for a general degree. And I went to Queen Mary College in East London, East London being where my family roots were. And considering my background and what had happened to me, there was a little bit of a security in going back to somewhere where there were some family roots. They weren't strong, but they were there. So that's where I went to study.
I think you had trouble with your physics. Do you want to just explain that?
I did say earlier, the school I went to, this good school I went to, the teachers were of varying quality. They weren't paid. Some of them weren't qualified. And the physics teacher I had for A-level was basically a maintenance person in the school and the college. And it didn't take us long to realize that this man wasn't going to teach us any physics at all. So I went to the headmistress and I said, look, could you do something about this? He said, well, I'll fill up your timetable. We'll take your physics and you can do O-level Greek, which I'm sure you'll enjoy. Well, actually, the Greek teacher was very good and I did enjoy it, but I only had 2 A-levels. And when I came to university, I had to take 3 subjects, including physics, and I failed that after my first year. Now, this is a shock to me. You have to remember my parents were abroad. They didn't know very much at all about the English educational system. They weren't there to be able to support me. I was on my own. I had no money apart from my student grant, which wasn't enough to keep you going all the time anyway. And so I was basically thrown out of college, but I was told that if I could get those exams, my first year exams at the end of part 1, they'd have me back. So I thought, well, I've got to do something about this. So I found myself a job as an assistant chemist in Howard's of Ilford, a job I actually quite enjoyed. And the pay I got was more than twice my student grant, so I felt actually quite rich by the end of this year, earning this money. I then went 4 evenings a week to West Ham College of Technology on this bicycle, which I still had, and excuse me, and studied the 3 subjects all over again, which I had to do. There, the physics teacher was a genius, fortunately for me. So I was able to pass my physics and go back and finish my course. And I did a lot better in my course than I expected.
But I think chemistry was your main love, is that right?
It was, yes. So I eventually got a good degree, and when I finished that, I decided that I would go in for teaching. Now, whether that's to do with safety or security or I knew that I was going to get work, I don't know. At that time, of course, you could do national service, and that's one way of getting out of national service, actually, is to go in for teaching. But it wasn't the main reason. But anyway, so I decided I would want to teach. During my training year, my PGC year for teaching...
You jumped out ahead of your research.
Yeah.
Is this your research?
I haven't got to that yet.
Oh, sorry.
So at the end of during my PGCE year, I got a call from a new professor of chemistry at the college I just left, invited me to do research. And that was totally out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it. I'd only taken a general degree, not an honours degree, and so on. But I spoke to my education tutor and he said, you'll only ever get one chance to do a PhD, take it. So I took it and did this research, and I enjoyed it, and got on quite well. And as I got towards the end of it, we then had people from industry who came to us to ask us if we'd work with them. And I didn't somehow like the idea. I still decided teaching was what I wanted to do, and so teaching was what I did want to do. So I told my professor this, and he said, well, in that case, I expect you to be a head teacher in 10 years. That was his challenge to me.
Well, we shall see about that shortly. How did you fund your research and teaching?
So excuse me. So I got a grant, as you normally did for your undergraduate, and you could get another grant, which was a bit more. Mm-hmm. So for $300 a year, I got up to $400 a year for doing research, and that really wasn't enough. So you still have to work extra. So during the holidays, I did all sorts of things. I worked in a hospital, I worked in a Christian holiday camp, I worked in an insurance company in London. I did, all kinds of things. In the winter, I worked in the post office, so I did two different shifts. I do an overnight shift sorting the letters, and then the next shift delivering the letters. You think about that for a minute, that's 16 hours. I was pretty tiring, I was at the end of that, but I needed the money. My parents were abroad, I just needed to make ends meet. So that's the sort of way I made ends meet. Yeah.
Now, all this time, you were living in East London or around, and you went to the Elim Church, and a certain lady comes into the story now, I think.
That's certainly true. So one of the other things by coming back to East London was I was able to attend the Elim Church that my parents attended. It was there they met themselves and became married from there. And I went back to that church. And as you did in Pentecostal churches, which ours was, when you come to a new church, particularly if you're a child of a pastor, you go to the pastor's house to visit them, to make yourself known, which is what I did. And I came there, and I was talking to Ethne's parents in the foyer when she breezed in. This is an 11-year-old Ethne, breathed in with some crisps. Said, would you like, I was introduced to her and said, would you like some crisps?
She's been feeding you ever since.
She's been feeding me ever since. And I remember, and we still joke about this together, I remember getting hold of her by two hands, swinging her around and saying, my mum would love a little girl like you. and my mother didn't realize I didn't realize what I just said, because things developed. So all the time I was a student at the time, we had our own boyfriends and girlfriends and so on, but all the time we went to the same church, we knew each other. And as time went on, this 11-year-old grew into a rather beautiful young woman, and so I got more interested, and we started going out together and fell in love, and so thereafter things grew.
Well, I think it's time for disc number 4, so do you want to just say a word about that?
Yes, disc number 4 is a jazz piece. I love music and all sorts of music. When I was a student, I was introduced to jazz, and not this particular jazz piece, but this is one we had in our home in Norwich, and I came to love it. I love it. I'm playing it for more than one reason. It's Oscar Peterson playing I Love Paris. I love Paris. I love France. So this would bring back all of that to me, that kind of connotation. Also, accompanying Oscar Peterson, he's on the piano, accompanying him is a double bass. I'd always wanted to learn the double bass, so I'm going to take this one with me to this desert island so I can hear someone playing the double bass really well in jazz. You know, jazz can be quite difficult sometimes. The improvisation, you lose the tune. I like jazz where I can still follow the tune. So you should be able to follow I Love Paris in this version.
You certainly got some double bass there.
That's absolutely. I could just imagine myself, like this. And I've never had the chance, really. Anyway, I'd enjoy that, sitting in the sun and listening to that.
Under the trees. Right, now your first teaching post was in Abingdon, and you were there for 6 years as head of department, but it was a slightly different, sort of unusual head of department. Can you say a bit more about that?
It was indeed, yes. So my first job was as a chemistry teacher in this school in Abingdon, in what was then Berkshire. And it was a relatively new grammar school, 4 years old. Excuse me, so when I got to it, it was starting its 5th year, and there hadn't been a chemistry teacher there before. So I was the first and only chemistry teacher to begin with, and so I basically wrote the syllabus, because there wasn't one, and built up from there. But this was a school with an outstanding and forward-looking head teacher, and I learned a lot about leadership from observing him. And that school was different in a number of ways, one of which it taught Chinese. Now, if you think about it, all those years ago, that was forward-looking, and it was never really taken up by the educational establishment. We were a school that taught Chinese, and children learnt Chinese there. And so it was a very good school to start my teaching career in. It was a school, of course, that was growing as well, because each year more and more children came in, and we went into 6th form, and so I was able to progress. I became officially head of chemistry, and then in due course, after 3 years or so, became actually head of science in that school. So that was pretty rapid progression as things go in the teaching profession. So I was very pleased with the progress I made in that school. And it was there, sorry.
I was going to say that, so you were there for 6 years.
I was there for 6 years.
And it was during that time that you married Ethne.
That's absolutely, yes. So by then, Ethne's parents had left Ilford and gone to Worcester. And so she was living up there. And in some ways that was a good thing, because I was able at weekends to drive from Abingdon to Worcester, visit her, continue our friendship and so on, and courtship, and come back again. And from Worcester we got engaged on the Northern Hills, which we visited a couple of times recently, and that's a lovely spot with lovely memories. And then we were married in 1966. That's really only 18 months after I started that job, and we set up our home in a wimpy home, the most basic house you could get in those days, second-hand furniture, and dug my own driveway for the car, that sort of thing. So you did everything yourself. A new house, we dug our own garden, so it was all new, and it was lovely. And we made our way there, and in due course, because of my progression, we were able to buy a bigger house in a different part of Abingdon. That was an old house that needed work doing on it. Now, if you think of my background, I didn't know one end of a paintbrush from another, but I learned very quickly things I could do and so on. And it was from that home, our eldest daughter, who's here, was born, and then Philip, our son, was born when we were there. And I tell you, this was the first time I had experienced proper family life, because I'd never experienced it before. And it's very moving for me to think about it. And so, for instance, I learned about children's stories, which I'd never heard, nursery rhymes, which I'd never heard, celebrating birthdays, which I'd never experienced, because of the way my background came. So family became dear and precious to me during that time. So whilst I was progressing professionally, I was learning a lot for myself personally about family life and all the values that go with that, and precious they are too. So we have very good fond memories of Abingdon, yes.
And then after 6 years, you decided to move forward. You said to me the other day you're always looking for new things and challenges and so on.
it seemed to look back on my life and realise that a lot of the things I've done are sort of new or challenging or slightly different. So I went to this school which was innovative, and so I felt at this point, and the whole comprehensive reorganisation thing was big. The Labour government was introducing comprehensive reorganisation, and there wouldn't have been an opportunity in that same school to progress further. So I was looking for deputy headships, and obviously Ethie and I prayed about this, and I've got this job then down as a deputy head teacher in Burgess Hill in Sussex. And that was an interesting one because that was a secondary modern school becoming comprehensive. And so it was getting bigger. And so I went there as deputy head teacher as the academic who came from a grammar school, interested in the sort of attitudes people had about education in those days. But that was a formative experience. I was basically learning on the ground what leadership was like, having seen someone do it in my previous school. So, so that went well. And what happened there was, after 3 years, the head teacher, who was a classic secondary modern school, old school head teacher, he used to walk around the school with a screwdriver in his hand, in case, there were any screws that were loose indoors and so on, to make sure all the physical structures were right. And I was not the least bit interested in all of that. I never held a screwdriver in a school ever. But that's the kind of head teacher he is. But he was a lovely man in his way. Anyway, he retired, partly because at that time there was local government reorganisation, and we were in what's called Mid-Sussex. And Mid-Sussex at that time belonged to East Sussex in terms of local government, but they moved to West Sussex. And West Sussex didn't have sixth forms. And one of the things I was looking forward to in this job was developing a sixth form. And so we thought again about our career and so on, and prayed a lot about it, and eventually chose...
Yeah, well, we'll come on to that after the interval. Yeah. But first of all, just a few things about village life and your first experience, Claude, of a Church of England church.
Absolutely right. I must not get to say, actually, because it was here then our third child was born, Becky, yes. And in February, in the snow and ice, and driving there to the hospital was quite an interesting experience, but that's a side thing. Yeah, so we didn't live in Burgess Hill, we lived in Blakeney, where we were fortunate to be able to find a plot of land to have a house built on it, and it was right physically in the centre of the village. So we decided, well, we used to go to Elim churches, but there wasn't an Elim church for miles around, so we didn't want to go. So we decided we'd go to the local church. So we went to the Anglican church, which was near where the school was, and went into our first service, and were given this little red book, the Book of Common Prayer. And so when we started the service, I turned to page 1, and it wasn't page 1 we were on. We were on some other. I didn't know one side of the Book of Common Prayer from another. I was a visitor almost from outer space, coming to this Anglican church and not knowing anything about the Book of Common Prayer. And it's always a lesson to me when I'm in the pulpit or leading a service, don't assume that everybody there knows all the things you're going to talk about in terms of process. But there was also at the other end of the village what we call the Tin Tabernacle. That was a kind of brethren type church. And whereas in the Anglican church you got a 10-minute sermon, at that church you got a 45-minute sermon. So they were quite different in that respect. So we went to both, but we were asked by people there, look, could we start a home group? Could you start a home group? So that's our first introduction to home groups, was actually in our own house, where we had a mix of people from both churches. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, I think we're up to disc number 5 now. Oh, just to say that you did fulfill the prophecy of your research chemist man. By the way, that's when you became Dr. Claude Scott.
That's
when
right.
you're in the research.
Yes.
But you fulfilled his prophecy that within 10 years you were a headmaster, which is what we're coming on to next
right.
time.
Yes.
So this disc.
So my disc, before we come to the interval, is Lieutenant Kijé by Prokofiev. Now, why do I like this music? Well, because it's quirky and unusual. And my daughter Sarah here will know very well. We play this quite often in our house, in our home in Norwich. And we came across it because I think it was a background music to a film, Peter Sellers, I think, from one of his films. Anyway, I must have heard it somewhere, and I liked it, and I bought the CD. And in those days, you had, music stacks. You know those music stacks, a record player, CD player, and all this, like this. And so we're able to play a lot of music. Well, we love music in the house, so there was plenty of music. So I bought this, and we started playing it. And it's jaunty, unusual. I'm not playing it because I like the story behind it, or there is a story behind it, but it's just because the music is unusual. And I've chosen a rendering by Andre Previn because for my money he's as good a conductor as they come. I just like the way he conducts the music. And so I would enjoy this music on my desert island because it would make me want to skip and jump. And interestingly, this last movement, which is the one we're going to hear, is entitled Burial. But listen to the music and see what you make of that connection.
As you say, Claude, that was very jaunty and very nice. Well, we're having a break now. Do feel the bar is, I think, going to be open, and do have another drink. And we'll reassemble in about 20 minutes. When you hear the music being played, do sit down again. Thank you. Can I just say, please, many of you are picking up Claude's books and so on and wondering how to pay for them. Claude's going to say something at the end about that. So do help yourself to a book if you'd like one and hear about paying for it later. Thank you. That's as near as it can come.
That's fine, that's fine.
This can come. Well done, doing very well. Yes, brilliant, yes. So entertaining. It's great. Jill's a very good interviewer, isn't she? Yeah, excellent. Please take your seats again, ladies and gentlemen.
It's a sad story, isn't it, really?
Well, I think you mean the fact that he turned away from
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
I think it's
it's irrelevant, isn't it?
it is.
I've got to keep, I keep turning towards, I'll keep turning,
Yes,
I
yes, you
mustn't do
must
it
talk
unless I
about
know, yeah.
It's easy for me because I've got that. I mean, if you'd rather have that, but then you've got to think about that too.
I'm looking forward to reading this.
Play it again.
Please take your seats, ladies and gentlemen, for the second part. Shall I start? Shall I start? Well, Claude, the second part of this brings you to Norfolk, to your time in Norfolk, which is still here, happily. And you went to Norwich to become head of Thorpe St Andrew Comprehensive School. You've said to me it was your most demanding job, especially in the first 5 years. So would you like to elaborate on that a bit?
Well, it certainly was. I love a challenge. I didn't realise quite the challenge I was taking on when I came to Norwich, but the job was to amalgamate two schools, a grammar school with 1250 pupils and a secondary modern school with 950 pupils, into one comprehensive school. So I was appointed in January 77. The school would start September 77. The existing head teachers were retiring at the end of the summer term, but I was setting up the school under their feet. And I don't know whether you remember those times, not everybody agreed with the comprehensive idea. And so there were difficulties of all kinds that I came across. But the challenge, in many ways, was within the school itself, if you think about it. So I was starting a school of roughly 2,000 pupils. Of course, I didn't know any of them, and I didn't know any of the staff, but I had to make a staff team. So there were 5 existing deputy head teachers, and I needed only 3. There was a head of department. There were 2 heads of departments, one in each school, and I only needed 1. And so I had to negotiate my way appointing all these. And so it was difficult from all sorts of points of view, a big challenge for me.
I'm sure it was. And you had to deal with problems, both of pupils and staff. And how did you deal with problems? I mean, are you a man who loses your temper and shouts?
I think the audience can answer that question. No, I don't shout. And it's one of these interesting things about personalities and leadership and so on, that I haven't needed to shout. Some way in which I work, I suppose, that people accept me and maybe take me seriously. And occasionally, if I wag my finger, that's possibly all that's needed. But so I haven't needed to shout at all to assert my authority.
I have a little anecdote here, just on my own part, that we had a new kitchen fitted a few years back. And our kitchen fitter was a chirpy lad, and he knew his job, and he was very happy and busy and confident and in charge of himself. And we said to him one day, where did you go to school? And he said, oh, Thorpe St Andrew. And we said, oh, who was your headmaster? Dr. Scott. So we said, oh, he lives around the corner. Oh, does he? So we invited Claude to come round. And he came round the next morning. And as soon as our fitter saw him, he almost stood to attention and saluted. It was so funny. Completely different. Obviously, great respect there.
That's right.
Now, also, while you were in Thorpe St Andrew, where you were for 16 years, firstly, you took part in Holy Trinity, the Church of Holy Trinity in Norwich, and you played a significant part in that, I think.
Yes, well, when we first came to Norwich, we didn't know it at all. We didn't know the churches or anything. We'd been to this Anglican church in Sussex, and so we were looking around, but went to maybe 2 or 3 different churches for a Sunday just to see what they were like. But as soon as we set foot in Holy Trinity, Norwich, we could sense it was our home. They had a creche, there were provision for young people, the feel of the service was good, and it just seemed like a proper spiritual home, and so it proved.
This is where we met, Scots.
That's right, so this is where we met, yes, indeed. So it proved to be a place where we grew as a family together, but also within the church family, and our children were able to benefit from all the teaching that they received there, and the fellowship with lots of young people there, yes.
And towards the end of your time there, a new scheme, Heads into Industry, was developed. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. Well, as I was said before, I like a challenge, I like new things. And Head Teachers into Industry, I got interested in what they were doing and discovered that what they did was to place head teachers into industry for a year, so you really got immersed so that we could learn about leadership from a different context. And I thought, after a number of years, this would be something, I could benefit from. So I applied for this and was appointed, as it were, to Coleman's of Norwich. And you all know Coleman's of Norwich and Mustard and everything else. So I joined the management team there and spent a wonderful year in every way. But the outcome of that was quite interesting. While I was there, I'd also started a project, was thinking of starting a project called Schools Outreach, which was to place outreach workers who were non-establishment, non-teachers, into schools to help disaffected pupils who didn't want to learn and so on, to try and turn them around. The idea was to appoint them, place them in a school, and just allow them to be there, really. And so we started thinking about this. So I put the idea to Coleman's, would they help fund one of these? And when I explained what it was, they said, yes, if you can find half the money, we'll find the other half. So they funded the first worker, who was brilliant. He really was good at Blakeney School and really set the pace. And so that worked like that. But when, after I had left Coleman's and there was a new managing director there, I was asked back because the new managing director wanted Coleman's to have bigger view. I'm trying to get the right word here. Image in the town, and wanted to exploit that a little bit. So he asked me about this project, and he said, I think we could do a bit more here. And so the outcome of that conversation was that they agreed to fund another 4 workers. So as well as I found the money, half the money. And so we raised half the money. In those days, a worker cost roughly 20,000, so we had to raise 10,000 for each. And so we had to raise £40,000 ourselves. But we did, and they funded that. And out of that came a biggish project, so big I couldn't handle it myself anymore, passed it on to the YMCA. And at one time, they had 20 odd workers throughout schools in Norfolk. So out of that little experience of mine, things grew. And I love that kind of thing, when I can start something, see an opportunity, and then able to pass it on. But, I enjoyed doing that.
And I think it was at this time that you bought Blakeney, or a pad in Blakeney as a bolt hole.
Indeed. Well, with the job I had, I needed some respite sometimes. And so we found a little flat, the smallest, cheapest one we could find in Blakeney, as a bolt hole. And we could sail. Our children had learnt to sail. And so we could sail from there. So we bought that. And that was our first introduction to this village. Yes.
Okay, well, I think we're ready for disc number 6 now.
Disc number 6, the King Singers. I love male voice singing. I love a cappella singing. We put those two together and you get the King Singers. They're one of the finest groups still, I think. We remember going to listen to them when we were down in Sussex, performing in Brighton. And they walked onto the stage, no piano, no tuning fork as far as I could see, and they just started singing. Just wonderful harmony music. And there again is another group where the repertoire is huge and wide. And I thought about, I've got to have something from the King Singers, but I'd chosen something. It doesn't really sound very much like King Singer-ish, but actually is. It's the Jimmy Brown song, originally Les Trois Cloches, which was a French song and originally sung by Les Compagnons de la Chanson, which is a French group. But this is the King Singers singing it. And the reason I've chosen it, partly because I love the King Singers anyway, and the other reason is that somehow harmonizes with life in a village. This is about life in a village in France, of course, but the sort of rhythm of life comes through in this very simple song. But what I'd ask you to do, and I've written the words down here because it's important, at the end of each verse, the congregation prayed for guidance from above. There's a little bit of theology at the end of each verse which relates to the time of life of Jimmy Brown, the Jimmy Brown song.
There's a village deep in the valley, among the pine trees half forlorn, and there on a sunny morning, little Jimmy Brown was born. So his parents brought him to the chapel when he was only 1 day old, and the priest blessed the little fellow, welcome Jimmy to the fold. All the chapel bells were ringing in the little valley town, and the song that they were singing was for baby Jimmy Brown. Then the little congregation prayed for guidance from above. Lead us not into temptation, bless this hour of meditation, guide him with eternal love. There's a village hidden deep in the valley, in
Jimmy was to meet his love. Many friends were gathered in the chapel, and many tears of joy were shed. In June, on a Sunday morning, when Jimmy and his bride were wed, bong, 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 all the chapel bells were ringing. 'Twas the great day in his life. 'Twas the song that they were singing was for Jimmy and his wife, and the little congregation prayed for guidance from above. Lead us not into temptation, bless, O Lord, this celebration, may their lives be filled with love. From a village hidden deep in the valley, one rainy morning, dark and gray, a soul winged its way to heaven. Jimmy Brown had passed away. Silent people gathered in the chapel to say farewell to their friend, whose life had been like a flower, budding, blooming to the end. Bong, 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 bong. Just the lonely bell was ringing in the little valley town. 'Twas farewell that it was singing to our good old Jimmy Brown, and the little congregation prayed for guidance from above. Lead us not into temptation, may his soul find the salvation of thy great eternal
Yes, that was great. Now, Claude, moving on, we've come to your next great challenge, which is your ordination. So would you like to tell us how that came about and a bit about what it involved?
Certainly. Well, as I mentioned before, we were going to Holy Trinity Church in Norwich, and we were very involved in that church. You know, the whole family was involved. My wife, Ethne, was involved quite a lot. She was in charge of what used to be called the Young Wives group. I don't know whether they'd be allowed to use that term these days. And the toddler group. We were involved in lots of activities, and I remember more than once, we'd have close to 100 people in our own house for, Christmas time or whatever. And it was active. We were active. We were really active in this church. And in spite of that, I had this feeling that maybe there was something else God wanted me to do, and coordination might be that. So I went to speak to our rector, Gordon Bridger, mentioned this to him, and he was very supportive. And so I then went through the process and obviously expressed interest and went through the process. And it's quite a rigorous process of assessment which the Church of England takes. So you're interviewed by various people, interviewed by the bishop and so on, and it's quite challenging. And before you even get to the training bit, I didn't say anything to our children at this stage that I was thinking of doing this, and neither to the people in the school, apart from 3 people, because I knew this. If I went in for this training, it was part-time. So it was 6 weekends away, summer school away, 15 hours of study, an essay every 2 weeks. So very challenging. And I was running this big school, and it was quite a thought. So I thought I really ought to speak to my deputy heads about this. So I got the 3 of them together, And I explained to them, I said it was confidential, but this is what I was thinking to do. Now, when you're looking for affirmation, this was the one thing that really affirmed for me, more than one, but I'll explain this one first. That each of them said, you do it. We think it's right for you, and we'll take one of your responsibilities off you to take some pressure off you during your 3-year training. And for me, that was a massive affirmation, and they did. Each of them took one of my responsibilities from me, which gave me that little bit more free time. The other affirmation came rather differently, so I went into the whole training thing and was about to embark on it, and Ethne gets a phone call from a friend we hadn't heard from for some time. She was one of the teachers in our original school. Out of the blue, she said to Ethne, listen, I had a dream last night that Claude was going to be a vicar. Completely out of the blue. And you put those two things together, quite apart from what I felt within myself was a calling, these were two really affirmative things that happened. So I definitely felt this was the right thing. And for me, it wasn't training to be a full-time clergy person. It was claiming to be an unpaid, non-stipendiary, someone who would support the ministry of other clergymen, within the Church of England. So ever since then, I've enjoyed supporting other ministers in their ministry, in their places of worship.
How long was the training, Claude, from beginning to end?
It was 3 years.
I don't know how you did it. I have to say.
I look back and wonder how I did it myself. But there we go.
I think we're up to disc number 7 now.
Fine. Matthew Passion. Now, all my life, all my adult life, I've sung in choirs. When I was in Norwich, at Norwich Philharmonic, and every 3 years they had a festival chorus, and I sang all kinds of music, but Handel, Mozart, Fauré, all the great pieces, the sacred pieces as well. Matthew Passion, for some reason, has always stood out to me as one of the outstanding ones. I've sung in this a couple of times. It's got a double chorus, and the whole meaning, of course, of the Passion speaks to me personally and spiritually, but the music itself is something else. So, I love all of that side of it. Alongside this is the fact that it's been my privilege at different times to sing in a choir with each of my children. They were in the same choir as me, and that's just a wonderful experience to be able to have. So that's also happened to me. So we're going to have the last movement here, and which is quite a long one, but we won't have all of it. But in tears of grief, dear Lord, we leave thee. This is the end of the Passion, when the body of Jesus had been laid in the tomb.
Well, retirement, Claude, but you didn't retire and shut the door and that was it, hang your boots up, as it were. You did several things in your retirement. Can you just brief? I think you were an Ofsted inspector who rather acquired a bad name since your day, I think.
Well, retirement from my job as a head teacher, I took a job with LEA for 2 years after I left that job. But after I left the LEA job, I took the opportunity to start working for myself. And there were many opportunities at that time. Being an inspector was one. I became a registered inspector for primary and secondary schools. That became less and less enjoyable as the government turned the screws in different ways and made inspections quite difficult. But by then I'd established myself in other ways and got to work with the National College for School Leadership in training head teachers and then their professional development and deputy head teachers as well. So I spent a very enjoyable, formative, good 10 years or so working in that field and travelling all over the country, meeting heads and deputies and helping them in their journey.
And you have quite a large family by this time. 3 of your own children all have married and got children, so you have 12 grandchildren, of whom I believe 2 are getting married this year. Is that correct?
That's true, yes, 2. Yep.
And you moved up to Blakeney, I think about 2011, was it? 2012?
Something, yeah, yes.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And you went to a birthday party of one of your former deputies, and that's had significant results for this church. Can you explain that?
Absolutely right, yes. We were invited to a 70th birthday party of one of my deputy head teachers, former ones, and in that party was another one of my deputy head teachers who came to me. He was living in Sussex at the time and said, "Claude, how would you like to come to Rwanda?" Just like that, out of the blue, over a drink of wine. Then I turned round to Ethne and looked at her. There was only one answer to that. Of course, Africa, going back there was what we would want to do. We didn't realise what was involved here. And we joined the group from Lewis in Sussex and went to Rwanda and got to working with them alongside people who had suffered from the genocide and what the church was doing to bring these communities together. But I realised once we got there, I looked at the Google map and discovered that where we were going to work was no more than 90 kilometres from Baraka, the very mission station that I was telling you about early on. So I was determined to find out a bit more whether I could go and visit those churches. So as a result of working in Rwanda, we'll come back to that in a minute, I then had the opportunity, made contact with pastors there to go and visit the churches which my parents had established and what was still left there. What was interesting, as soon as they got to hear that Bwana Scott's son was coming, then everybody wanted to meet me when I went down there. My father had such a reputation. When he went there, apparently there were about 60 churches in that part of Congo, and when he left there were 220. So that's the impact that he had during the time that he was out there. And it felt as if each of these 220 churches wanted me to visit them. Anyway, I had a wonderful but challenging time, a very tiring time, very emotional time actually, visited them. And at one point, there were a number of pastors there who wanted to speak to me, and they got me around a table and said, "Look, since your father left, we haven't had very much good Bible teaching here. Would you like to come and give us a course, the Bible teaching? We'll get 120, 130 pastors from all over the Congo, and we'd love to do it." Now, I was retired for a start, and it's one thing to be a clergyman, it's another thing to be a head teacher. It's quite another thing to train 120 African pastors and to even think what to do. I'm very careful about cultural things, and to come in as a Westerner and think that what I'm telling them about, the Bible and leadership and so on is necessarily right. As it happens, God's hand was in this, because at the very time they were asking me that question, Langham International had published a book, the African Bible Commentary, which was written by Africans for Africans. So when I came back, I was much challenged by what I was asked, and eventually looked at this book and realized this could be the vehicle I could use to train these pastors. And so we finished up getting 120 pastors together, and when I went to Langham and said, look, I want to do this training, they said, if you're giving it free, we'll give you all the books free. So they gave me 120 Bible commentaries free, but we had to get all these ministers to that place, we had to feed them, we had to house them. So it was costing us something like £12,000 to get these pastors together. They have no money at all. And so we managed to raise that money. In the process of raising it, a charity came to us and offered us the same money all over again. So we had that money twice over. So I was challenged by that again. What do I do with this money? As it turns out, the first lot of training was wonderful, very much appreciated. You've got to realize that African pastors are lucky to have a Bible. They have a Bible, no other literature at all. They have no other means of supporting their ministry. And so to present them with a book of this kind, written by Africans within their cultural language, was just a gold mine for them. And so they appreciated it, and we managed then to train the trainers, so we got some of their leaders trained, so they could train others in using the book. And so I guess by the time we'd finished these two projects, something like 400 or 500 African Bible commentaries finished up in the Congo.
You didn't say about one of the early stories of the first time you went back, which has always stuck with me, is that as you were going along, you went into a village and the pastor came out holding a photo of your father and saying, your father put me in charge of this church and I'm still here in spite of the genocide. I find your stories like that are absolutely amazing.
Yeah. There are actually two chaps we met there who told me that they'd gone swimming in the lake with my brother and myself. And I looked at these two and I thought about the lake and I thought, would I have gone swimming in that lake with those crocodiles? Probably not, but it was a nice idea. Yeah.
And then obviously from that have developed the groups that from this church that have gone out to Rwanda, which Claude has led with the help of a man called Jonathan Lamb. And we're still in contact with Life in Abundance, which is a charity that works there now. But a number of us here tonight have had several visits to Rwanda as well.
That was another wonderful experience that came out of all of this, because having been with the Lewis group and experienced it, once we started talking amongst people here, they said, can we go too? And it's been wonderful. We've taken 5 groups out, I think, over that time. And the wonderful thing about working in Rwanda is that when you're there, the thing they appreciate more than anything, we've taken things, we've taken filters and all this, they appreciate you being there.
The bishop said that, didn't he?
They appreciate you being there. That's showing God's love, is being there with them. And that's made a big impact on me. And I think it's influenced a number of people in this village, having gone out there to see that. Yes.
Well, that's really brought us up to date. Somebody, I think, said something about Claude's brothers. Now, I'm sure you'll agree with me that Claude's upbringing was very unusual. It could have turned him against the world. It could have turned him against his parents. It could have made him into an angry young man. But you can see he hasn't developed that way at all. But I think your younger brother was not quite so
That's
fortunate,
right,
isn't
yes.
it? Right.
Sadly, my younger brother really felt the whole emotional thing of being separated from his parents and found the whole thing very difficult. And so when he was of an age when he could decide what to do for himself, he left this country and went to New Zealand. And he's married and had a lovely family out there. But it's the flip side of missionary work. You know, my father established a lot of churches in France, established all these churches in Africa, and they love him. You know, when I was out there, they just loved him. I was Barnard Scott's son, so they put me up on a pedestal. And yet the other side of it is, you know, the family side has had difficulties, there's no question about that.
Right, disc number 8, Claude.
Well, this might surprise some of you. Claven sings gospel, and spirituals have always been an interest of mine. And I'm going to have Paul Robeson singing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot as my last piece. Now, a number of reasons for that. First of all, actually, it would remind me of Claven Sings Gospel and all the songs that we've sung around at the back there. It would remind me of rugby, because it's the theme song of the England rugby team. So Cuma, Wales rugby team, Swing Low, English rugby team, so it reminds me of that. And I just have this thought that maybe when my time comes, I could go out to this song in this church.
Make a note, Ethel.
How about that as an idea? And the final thing is, Paul Robeson's got the kind of bass voice I wish I had. So I've got my double bass, and now I've got my bass voice.
Swing low, sweet chariot, come in to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, come in to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, come in but carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, come in but carry me home. I looked over Jordan, what did I see? Coming but carry me home, a band of angels coming after me, coming but carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming but carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming but carry me home. If you get there before I do, coming but carry me home. Tell all of my friends I'm coming too, coming but carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming but carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me
Lovely. Now, Claude, if you could only keep one at The others all fell to the bottom of the sea. Which one would you keep?
I think I'd keep the Matthew Passion. And the music is beautiful, and the message is there. And I know even if it ends with Jesus in the grave, the story doesn't end there.
And you've got the Bible, and you've got Shakespeare's works. What book would you choose?
Oh, I knew this was coming, and I thought about this. I could choose a tome. In fact, I'm going to choose a small book. It's Bear Grylls, A Survival Guide for Life.
He might need it. I know DIY is not your strong point, is it, Claude?
Absolutely not my strength, so I need anything I can get to help me survive on this desert island.
And your luxury?
My luxury would be a wine cellar. I've thought about a toolbox. A toolbox is no good to me because I'm not very practical. A wine cellar I could make use of. I could just imagine myself. Anyway, a friend of mine has got a wine cellar, it's a circular one, built into the floor of his kitchen, and you can walk into it, and he's got 1,000 bottles of nice wines, and it seems to me 1,000 bottles probably would just see me out on the desert island.
Fine. I meant to introduce you at the beginning as something of a wine connoisseur with which to look it up, but anyway. Well, thank you very much, Claude, for your remembrances, your sharing much of your life with us, and quite a life it's been. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And he's just going to say a word about his book.
Can I just say something about this? Some of you have noticed as you came in on the table, there's a book called Back to the Mango Tree. This is a book I've written about my life, and if you want to know all the other nitty-gritty details, you'll find them in here. You're very welcome to have one. There is no price. We're not selling it. We're very happy for you to have a copy and ask for a donation. The donations will go directly to Life in Abundance, which is a charity that works in Rwanda and Congo, where we would like the money to be spent. You can put as much or little as you like towards that. You can leave your money in the glass bowl at the back, or you can go on Just Giving and just put Just Giving and go and you'll find Claude's Just Giving page. You donate there. If you're a techie sort of person, there's a QR code on the back of this, and if you go on the QR code, it'll take you to my Just Giving site, and then you'll be able to make your donation there, which could be gift aided. So whichever way you'd like, if you'd like to have a copy, you'd be very welcome to have that. And what I want to say is, I don't want this to take away at all from the fundraising of this evening, because you've come here to support the friends of this church, and we're very glad for your support. If you haven't brought money, you can always pay for this at another time, somewhere in Just Giving.
Well, Claude, thank you very much for sharing some details of that fascinating life of yours, and that was a really enjoyable Desert Island session, and thanks also to Jill for asking all the right questions and putting them so well. So on behalf of us all, many thanks. We have a small token of our appreciation here for each of you.
Only 999 to get that.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
going to my wine cellar.
And lastly, thanks to our audience for turning out tonight and supporting us. Don't forget, copies of Claude's book are available at the back of the church before you leave. And do feel free to make a little donation towards the fundraising for the Friends of Blakeney Church. Fundraising last year was able to pay for our splendid new sound system. So do feel able to give as generously as you can. And thanks for coming. And sorry, last message, the bar is still open.
I see you managed to get the heaters, which is a good idea.
Yeah. Come off now.